The morning they lowered my husband into the earth, the world felt unnaturally silent, like even the wind was holding its breath. My hands were still trembling from the weight of goodbye when my phone vibrated, slicing through the hush like a blade. His boss. A man who had barely spoken to me before. His voice came through in a ragged whisper, urgent, haunted. "You need to see this." Those 4 words clawed into my chest, pulling something dark and unsteady awake inside me. Grief had barely settled its shadow around my shoulders, yet beneath it stirred a sharper, colder feeling, a sense that I had buried more than a man that day. I felt the ground shift beneath my feet, as if the truth, whatever it was, had been waiting for this moment to rise. And as the echoes of his voice lingered in my mind, I realized I had not lost my husband to fate. I had lost him to something far more deliberate. And someone was about to make sure I learned why. The cemetery gates were still groaning shut behind me when I realized I couldn't wipe the soil from my palms. It clung to my skin like the last trace of him, the last proof that his body now belonged to the earth. My throat burned with a grief so raw it felt animal, something feral and wounded pacing inside my ribs. I had barely taken 3 steps toward my car when my phone vibrated in my coat pocket. His name flashed across the screen, my husband's boss. For a moment I simply stared at it, numb. That man had shaken my hand at the funeral with stiff fingers and eyes that refused to meet mine. Now, his voice trembled through the speaker the moment I answered. "Where are you?" he asked, breathless. "You need to come. Now." There was something inside his tone, panic, desperation, guilt, that tightened around my lungs. He wouldn't tell me why. Wouldn't say what had changed so suddenly in the hour since I buried my husband. He only insisted I drive to the office. His office. The place my husband had spent more hours inside than he ever spent sleeping beside me in the last months. The drive felt endless, a corridor of memories pressing against the glass. I remembered his tired smile at the door, the shadows under his eyes, the way he brushed off my questions with a kiss to my forehead. "It's nothing. Just work." Now those words felt like lies he'd been forced to swallow. When I walked into the office, his boss looked like a man unraveling. Hair disheveled, hands trembling so violently I thought he might drop the object he held. A sealed envelope. Heavy. My name written across it in my husband's handwriting. But the date, God, the date was the day before he died. My heart stuttered painfully as I tore it open, expecting a letter, an explanation, a farewell. Instead, something flat and cold slid into my hand. Photograph. And when I lifted it, my breath vanished. My husband stood in the frame, shoulders rigid, eyes wide with a fear I had never seen before, staring at a man I did not recognize. His boss whispered behind me, voice cracking. "He told me if anything happened to him, you'd be the one who needed to see this." The room tilted. Because the man beside my husband wasn't just a stranger. He looked like someone who had already decided my husband wasn't meant to live. The edges of the photograph quivered between my fingers as I whispered, "Who is he?" But the answer my husband's boss gave shattered everything I thought I knew. The photograph trembled in my grip as though it carried its own pulse. His fear bleeding through the glossy surface, seeping into my skin. My husband had always been the steady one, the quiet harbor where my storms found rest. To see him frozen in terror, it shredded something fundamental inside me. His eyes weren't just afraid. They were pleading, as if he knew the moment the shutter clicked that this image would become his final cry for help. I turned the photograph over with shaking fingers. A single line of text waited on the back. An address, scrawled in handwriting I recognized from every birthday card, every note he'd ever slipped into my coat pocket. Yet the letters looked rushed, frantic, as though he wrote it while looking over his shoulder. His boss watched me, shoulders bowed beneath an invisible weight. "He was digging into something he shouldn't have," he murmured. "Something tied to the company." I begged him to stop. He said it wasn't just about him anymore. The words cracked open a vault of memories. His late nights, the way he closed his laptop the moment I walked into the room. His sudden tenderness that last week, as if memorizing the shape of my face before he vanished from it forever. I clutched the picture to my chest, the edges biting into my palm. This wasn't grief anymore. It was awakening. I drove to the address, the city blurring past me in streaks of gray and wet pavement. My heartbeat echoed louder with each turn, matching the rhythm of his handwriting in my memory. Urgent, desperate, final. By the time I reached the building, dusk had smothered the sky in bruised shades. The hallway smelled of dust and abandonment, as though whatever existed here had died long before my husband did. I reached the door with the matching number. The frame hung crooked. The lock was split open. And as I pushed the door with the tip of my trembling fingers, the darkness inside breathed out like something that had been waiting for me. Someone had gotten here before I did, and whatever they were searching for, I could feel the echo of their presence still lingering in the air. The air inside the room felt stale, as if it had been holding its breath through every moment that led to my husband's death. Dust floated through the slivers of fading light, drifting around overturned chairs, shattered drawers, and papers scattered like fallen feathers from some frantic struggle. My pulse throbbed in my throat as I stepped inside, closing the broken door behind me with trembling fingers. His scent lingered, faint, fading, but unmistakably his. It clung to the edges of the chaos the way a ghost clings to its last unfinished wish. I ran my fingers across the nearest desk, tracing the arc of a coffee mug toppled on its side. The dark stain dried into the wood like old, unspoken fear. Then I saw the wall. My breath snagged. My husband's handwriting, familiar, slanted, covered it in a labyrinth of notes, arrows, and names. Some were circled so violently the ink had bled through the paper. But one name stood out, marked again and again, its letters carved into the page like wounds. The man from the photograph. A shiver coiled through me. My husband had been tracking him, following him, fearing him, predicting him. And as my eyes moved along the desperate scrawl of his notes, the truth grew close. He hadn't been imagining the danger. He hadn't been dramatic or overworked. He had been hunted. I found a journal on the floor, its spine bent and bruised. My hands shook as I opened it, and the first page sliced through me like a blade. He had written to me, directly, intimately, as though he had known this moment would come. If you're reading this, I couldn't outrun it. But you can finish what I couldn't. A sob pushed into my chest, burning like fire that refused to be swallowed. I pressed my fingers to the ink, wishing it were his skin, wishing he could still breathe through these words. Suddenly, the floorboard beneath me creaked, froze. Another sound followed, a slow, deliberate shift of weight behind me. The kind of movement that didn't belong to memory or ghosts. I turned, pulse detonating inside my ribs. A silhouette stood in the doorway, blocking the last strip of dying light. Not a stranger passing by. Not a lost wanderer. Someone who knew exactly where to find me. As the figure stepped into the room, a voice I had never heard before whispered my husband's name, and my blood turned to ice. The figure stepped into the room as though the shadows themselves had carved a path for him. His presence filled the space with a quiet gravity that made the air pulse against my skin. I tightened my grip on my husband's journal, holding it like a shield even though it was nothing but paper and ink. His last breath pressed into pages I wasn't ready to surrender. The man raised his hands slowly, palms open, as if approaching a wounded animal. His voice, low, threaded with sorrow, shaped my husband's name with a reverence that contradicted the terror I had seen in that photograph. "I knew he'd lead you here," he murmured. I backed away, my spine hitting the corner of the wall plastered with my husband's frantic notes. "Stay back," I warned, though my voice trembled like glass on the edge of breaking. "You were with him. You were the last person to see him alive." His eyes flinched at that, as though I'd plunged a blade straight into something raw inside him. "I tried to save him," he said. "You have to believe me. He trusted me." The words scraped across my heart. Trusted. The last weeks before his death paraded through my memory. The late nights, the whispering phone calls, the darkening fear in his eyes each time he thought I wasn't watching. Had this man been the voice on the other end of those calls? The one guiding him deeper into danger? Or the one trying to pull him back out? Why was he afraid of you? I whispered. He exhaled a shattered breath and reached slowly into his jacket. I flinched, ready to run, ready to fight with nothing but my grief and my shaking hands. But he only pulled out a folded sheet of paper, worn, softened at the edges by touch. He wasn't afraid of me, he said gently. He was afraid of what would happen to you if he failed. The room tilted beneath my feet as he placed the paper on the desk, stepping back to let me approach. My husband's handwriting sprawled across it. Another message meant for me. A final piece of the truth. He had refused to betray me. He had chosen to die protecting me. Anger, deep, molten, electric, ignited through every vein. Grief sharpened into purpose. My husband had left me a path not to mourn him, but to finish the war he hadn't survived. The man extended his hand. I can take you to the ones who did this, he said. But once you take this road, you don't come back. I stared at his hand, feeling my husband's heartbeat in the ink pressed against my palm. And I took it. I didn't know then that the first life I would be forced to unravel belonged to someone I had once trusted with my own.